Hello and welcome to episode 66 of Just Keep Writing,
a podcast for writers
by writers
to keep you writing.
I'm Marshall.
I'm Nick.
I'm Brent.
And I'm Will.
Okay, so this episode we have with us one of my favorite writers, and so this is why I had to steal the intro this time. Fellow X-Men fan and just writer extraordinaire, Sam J. Miller. I am stoked to have you here for our last Pride episode of the month. And yeah, I guess we could just get right to it because we only have an hour and I want to spend it as much as possible talking about your stuff. So I'm going to turn it over to Will. He usually starts off with the questions and then I have a few towards the end.
Awesome. That sounds great. I'm super happy to be chatting with y'all.
Yeah, we're stoked to have you.
So Sam, describe your career in 3 words. And it can be completely disconnected. It doesn't have to be a sentence. 3 random words.
Messy, delightful, and I see if I was a writer, I could give you a 3rd word and it would be amazing and it would be the perfect word. I don't know, angry.
Okay, cool. So now we're going to unpack those 3 words.
I don't remember what the first 2 words were.
I do. I wrote them down. So we're going to unpack those 3 words. So talk to me about messy.
Yeah, I'm really all over the place. I have tried a bunch of genres and written a bunch of things that are all over the place. My first novel was a young adult novel, and then I followed that up with a dystopian far future science fiction. And my latest novel, The Blade Between, is a horror novel. So, I've also made a ton of mistakes, and it took me, my debut novel that was published in 2017, The Art of Starving, was actually my 6th or 7th novel because I wrote a bunch of novels before it that no one wanted. And so I sort of really have made all the mistakes along the way that not all the mistakes you can make because there's no end to mistakes, but I've made a lot of mistakes. So messy is definitely the word, the first word that came to mind.
Awesome. And delightful.
Delightful. I've been having fun. I hope other people have been having fun if they read my stuff. Even when I'm screaming about things or writing about things that are really dark and twisted and make me feel all the things. I think it's a real privilege to be a writer. It's a real honor and responsibility to be able to tell stories and have them find an audience. And so I don't take any of it for granted. And I from my days trying to get a sexy gay erotica story into a punk rock zine to wherever I am now has been it's all been fun, even when I've been making horrible mistakes.
Amazing. And then angry.
Yeah, you would think angry and delightful could not coexist peacefully, but somehow they do. Because even though I am having a delightful time and have really had a blast at every point of the writer journey, I'm also really angry about a lot of things. The world is really full of horrible problems that I really hate and that are really a big motivating factor for me as a person and as a writer. And I spent 15 years as a community organizer working on issues of housing and homelessness and police reform in New York City. And so I had to it made me who I am, and I loved it and wouldn't have traded a minute of it, but it also meant prolonged proximity to just the most unspeakable violence and oppression and systemic injustice. And so, yeah, there's a lot to be angry about. So I think that trying to tell stories that reflect my anger and that can sort of help people who might also be angry about the things that make me angry feel like they can do something about those problems is that was my job as a community organizer. And I think that's also my job as a writer.
So, touching upon genre hopping, was that a conscious decision or was it more of how you were in your creative space? Were you just trying to write whatever you felt like writing and that you felt moved to write at that point?
Yeah, I think this shit happens. This is who knows what the next story is going to be that's going to knock on my door and be hello, I'm your next appointment. I'm sorry about all those other people who've been in the waiting room, but they will have to wait. So yeah, I mean, like I read really widely. I read a lot of genres, and I watch a lot of television and movies, and get a lot of inspiration from a lot of different places. And so often when I'm figuring out a story, it will go down a strange road based on, like, I don't know, not necessarily like the last book I read, but like a book I read 10 years ago that I'm like, oh yeah, this is sort of like that other thing. So I also like really like love genre, and I love every genre's toolkit and the rules and the gifts that it gives you. I'm also really bad at genre, and I always think that I'm writing something in one genre, and it turns out to be something else. So I have fun with it, but I don't know that I there's always genre gatekeepers who are going to tell you that something is or isn't the right fit for the genre, and that's usually pretty easy to tune out as a writer, is like, yeah, I'm just going to do this thing I want to do. So yeah, I'm playing in everybody's yard, and some of them aren't happy to have me, but here I am.
So I have one more question before I'll turn it over to Brent for a bit. Did you get pushback, or did you have to plan with your agent about how strategic you were going to be in those instances of like changing genres and going from young adult to adult? Can you talk about that?
Sure. I mean, I'm really fortunate. I have an amazing agent, and I feel like I know a lot of agents or writers who have vented or have shared with me that their agents are a little more directive in terms of like what their next project should be, or what they should think about, or whether their next project is ready to go out, right? Like, oh no, this needs to go, you need to do more work on this. My agent has always been, my agent is Seth Fishman at the Gernert Company. He's amazing. And he's always been like, yeah, do what you want to do. Like when I think that one of the pieces of wisdom you often get when you've had a little bit of success in a genre is to keep doing it. And so after Blackfish City came out, my second novel, my first for regular adults, there's sort of like an idea that if something lands, if something like gets award nominations or gets a good response, you should keep doing it. And I'm sure that's like, I know that that's valid advice for many artists, and many artists sort of like do that, and that's a natural fit for them. But that wasn't what I wanted to do. And, the next novel that came along after Blackfish City was like a gentrification noir horror novel called The Blade Between. And so, Seth has always been like, yes, do the thing you want to do. Like, if you're not sure what to do, if you have two things you want to do, we can talk about like, this is like what would be involved in if you go this way versus this way. But it ultimately comes down to me and what I want to do. As far as YA goes, like, I really love young adult books, and so that was like a natural fit for me, is like, yeah, I love these stories, I want to tell these stories. I think there's a this is going to sound weird, because I think there's this idea that young adult is often very like sheltered, like, oh, these are for kids, so they have to be protected. But I think there's an honesty to young adult that doesn't exist in regular adult books the same way. There's a rawness, there's a comfort with confusion. There's like I think when you write an adult novel, you sort of like have to pretend like you know all the answers. And when you write a young adult novel, you're sort of like, it goes with the territory that you know nothing, that you're like, I am just a confused person telling a story about a world I don't fully understand. Even though I have a lot of like sex and cursing in my young adult, as in like all my stuff, like, that's never been a problem for my editor. When we sold The Art of Starving, but actually before we sold it, when my editor at Harper Teen made an offer on it, but before we had accepted it, we had a phone call to make sure it was a good fit. And I was like, how comfortable are you with the amount of F-bombs and gay sex in this young adult novel? And she said, I think it has the perfect amount of F-bombs and gay sex. That felt like, yeah, we could probably work together.
That's amazing.
As a follow-up to that too, because I know, there's a lot of our community that are looking for agents and haven't published yet. And is this something, once they do get an agent and have a debut, would you encourage writers that just have maybe one novel out there to do what you did? And even if they don't have that agent, right, to say like, I would like to write this now, kind of thing. Because I know the industry is kind of fickle in that way. and it depends on the publisher and the agent and all that. But is there something to be? Would you encourage them to do that? I guess is my question.
I feel very nervous giving anyone career advice because I'm like, maybe this is like, in many ways, I'm very proud of my career and I love what I've done, but maybe this is like, maybe there's better role models for your career. Like maybe there are people who've made better decisions. So I think it's important for artists to write the books that they want to write. Like whatever, like whether or not it's the right moment for it to sell, whether or not your agent is the one to sell it, whether or not anyone in the world but you is ready for this book. If that's the book you want to write, that's the one you should write. And, maybe it it's not its moment. Maybe it needs to sit for a while or maybe you're, I had an agent before my current agent who I had to leave because it wasn't a good fit. And that's a really difficult process when you're an agent, when you're an author who like doesn't have a book out and you fought like hell to get an agent. Like parting ways with your agent when you don't have someone else lined up is a hard decision, but a really necessary one. And I definitely I often counsel my friends who are like, I don't know how I feel about my agent, to be like, you should leave your agent. Like if you're not loving your agent, if you're not feeling like it's a great fit, like this is your career. This is not their career. Fuck their feelings. Don't be a jerk about it. Don't be disrespectful. But if they're not selling, if they're not selling your books, if they're not able to make it happen for you, then then maybe it isn't the fit. And they have many clients. You only have one career. So it should always be about you and what you want to do.
Thank you. That's awesome advice, whether you were trying to give advice or not.
Yeah. I apologies, retrospective apologies if anyone follows that advice and fucks up their whole life.
And burns.
Yeah.
All right. So Will, was your grilling officially finished or?
My grilling is finished for right now. You may start.
The Will Grill is on hold.
Yeah, the Will Grill.
It's famous. It's famous.
I've been subjected to it a number of times. So. Okay, so I want to talk about, because I've read every book you've ever put out. So I was like, this is my chance. I get to talk about some stuff. All right, so something I've noticed in all of your work is that you kind of have class struggles where you have the upper class, the middle class, lower class, people that float between all in conflict with each other in various ways. But I don't ever see you taking the easy route of vilifying one side completely or, making the other side completely heroic. So I guess my question is, how do you keep a humanity-centered kind of vision when you're building those conflicts between class? Because especially with the work you've done, I think it would be very easy for you to vilify certain people, but yet you still give them humanity. So
it's really interesting you say that, because that is a huge tension. I remember when I first started as a community organizer, I had this quote that I always use, which is, from the talented Mr. Ripley, about how nobody thinks they're a bad person. Whatever you do, however horrible, it all makes sense to you in your mind. So no one's going around thinking I'm a horrible villain. Even if you're evicting families and throwing their, families with kids out into the street in the middle of winter, which is something that I think is a horrible villain act. That person has their reasons, and that action makes sense to them, and they're trying to protect their family or whatever is going on. And I remember saying that at a meeting and being yelled at by one of my organizer mentors, no, it doesn't matter if they have their reasons. It doesn't matter if they think they're a good person. They're a bad person doing bad things. And so, yes, in organizing, you need that narrative of this person is doing something bad. They need to stop. And that's important. But when storytelling is about when I think about the role of a storyteller as an activist, it's about replacing a story. It's about taking a story people have in their mind already, and changing it and replacing it with a better one. There's the story that a lot of people have in their minds around police officers is police officers, they have a really hard job. They're always in danger. If they overreact in some situations, we need to cut police officers some slack. I think that's a story a lot of people have in their minds, and is part of of why we haven't seen police reform like happening in the way that and there's a lot of reasons to it that is its own separate podcast. But I think being able to replace that narrative of like, these are complicated, but these are humans who are making decisions, and they even when they're doing something I think is like supremely villainous, like if I can like make them make sense to people, especially people who are not in the same place as me, people who might have the opposite story in their mind, then I think it's more likely that I can take them on that journey of like, I identify with this person who's doing a terrible thing. And maybe if I take that character on a journey, I can take that reader on a journey to understand an issue differently.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I feel like you do. Like, that's the thing. Like, every book of yours I've read, I've always felt that, okay, this person on the page, I should on paper hate them, but you managed to give those moments of like sympathy for that character. I think that's why I love Go so much from Blackfish City, because like on paper, Go is like a villain, and I was like, you should hate her, but she's actually very sympathetic in a lot of ways. And by the end of that book, I was like, Team Go all the way. So yeah, you do a very good job of like infusing humanity into people that we probably wouldn't normally root for in the day to day.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess on that same note, this is my next question. So talking about humanity and the kind of full breadth of it, another thing I really, really love about your work, and that kind of like, I think one of the reasons I latched onto it, especially after I read Art of Starving, I was like, was that you have this deep intersectionality of queer men in your work, right? Like, they're poor sometimes, they're of color, like, they're dealing with mental illness, they're dealing with, eating disorders. They're not physically like, grinder perfect or whatever. Like they're just real. They're just real people. And I mean, unfortunately, I feel like I can't name a whole lot of writers right alongside you in fiction that I think are science fiction and fantasy, especially, that I think are doing that. So I guess my question to you is like, why do you feel that that's the case? Like, why do you feel like this intersectionality of queer men in like genre fiction still feels kind of like poorly represented?
I mean, I think that we are entering or like in the early stages of an amazing renaissance of queer literature, and we are seeing tons of like really diverse queer stories being told. And I think we are leaving a period which we have been in for a really long time, where like, like we have to like fight to prove our value and that we have a right to exist. And so it's always been about like, what is the least offensive? What is the most bland mainstream? If you look at the history of like queer representation in television, especially, it's like it's a lot of white dudes, and like, they're funny and non-threatening and wealthy and don't have problems except like being gay. And so like, sort of fighting for like our right to be taken seriously as human beings has preoccupied the conversation so much that like our right to be like a hot mess, our right to be like addicts and mentally ill and, poor and doing, making sketchy decisions because like they are the best decisions we can make in a given situation, is like an exciting moment we're just now arriving in. And I think that, I'm definitely excited about what's going to happen in terms of that. But I think that's true all over the place. I think publishing has been so like boring, and like, especially when any kind of marginalized community story, publishing has only wanted to see one story from that community. And usually it's like, what's the story you are most like, what's the story of you as like a person who's like suffering in pain? Like, what's your pain? Tell us your pain. That's the book we want. And pain is super valid and important, and we should be able to tell the stories about our pain, but we should also be able to tell the stories about our partying and our families and our love and our sex and our, food, whatever it is that makes us amazing. And so, yes, publishing has a lot to answer for in terms of like the homogeneity of stories that have been that people have had at their disposal. And it's only like, it's a moment where a lot of amazing writers are being like, no, this story and this story and this story and this story.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I love that answer because it speaks to so much of what I've talked about in other episodes too, where I've just felt like queer men just have not been allowed to be like the full depth of our experience within fiction. And unfortunately, and I think part of that too is like, I think you're right, Sam. We're seeing like definitely a renaissance. And I think seeing more queer men actually kind of taking space and being like, hey, I'm going to tell my own story. Like maybe y'all could back off a little bit has been important. Yeah. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. So I guess, okay, so this is my next question. See, I actually worded these right because they're like all leading into each other really well. So
Good job.
You did good.
Good job.
Yeah, I did a good job. All right. So speaking of like, telling our own stories, one thing I really, really admire about your writing, and also at the same time, it kind of scares me because it makes me think about how I have to push myself, is that you put so much of yourself on that page. Like when I'm reading a Sam Miller story, no matter what the genre or the topic, I feel like you're just like cutting your wrists and just like all over the page. That's what we're getting. And it's scary because like that's there's a risk in that. Like you're just really putting yourself out there like that. And I admire it. But so I guess my question is, how do you walk that tightrope of like bringing yourself into the work in like that intimate way, but at the same time creating that distance to be able to tell a good functional story? Because I can imagine that must be tough.
This is such an interesting question because I feel like I always like my default has always been like, you should go to the scary place. The reason that I didn't sell the 6 novels that came before The Art of Starving was because I was trying really hard not to write The Art of Starving. I was like, let me try to write The Hunger Games. Let me try to write Battlestar Galactica. Let me try to do every other thing except the twisted, disturbing, fucked up story of my own adolescence. I mean, I didn't have superpowers, but otherwise it's pretty right on. And so I think that has always been my sort of like advice to writers is like, you're going to want to hide from the stories that are most pressing and important and urgent to you. And I think it's often like a really, that for me, it was like the way that I tapped into my, whatever. But now I'm sort of like, maybe I shouldn't give that advice because like, I don't think that like, publishing wants pain, publishing wants those stories. I think that it's not always necessary to do that. So I'm sort of like putting a caveat out there of like, it has been my path. And I think it's like where I tap into the stories that I'm most jazzed about, but I don't think it's everyone's path. And so like, it's totally possible to not go that path. And especially for folks, from marginalized communities where, there's like traffic in pain. I think it's it can be a dangerous piece of advice to give, I guess. So that's sort of like, I haven't even gotten to answering your question. That's like the caveat to answering your question.
Yeah.
But I think that for me, I think that when that's just where it comes to life. The more I put on my page what scares me, what excites me, what turns me on, what freaks me out, like that's when a story starts to come to life. And so there's got to be a little bit of me, even if it's a little bit of me being like, like I've written a couple different stories. One of the things that, I think as a queer person, we all sort of like acknowledge as a reality, even if it's not our reality, is that like a lot of people, when they come out, their parents disown them, their family turns their back on them, they kick them out of their homes. And so that idea of a parent who like rejects their child for being queer is something that like I find horrifying and confusing. And so like I've written a couple stories where the protagonist is that parent, and I'm like, I want to figure this person out. Like I want to get to where they got so twisted up inside that that's how they respond to their child's selfhood. Like whatever, even if it's me, like a thing that pisses me off, that's when a story starts to really spark for me, is like, oh, now I'm going to that place. So yeah, then I write it, and then I think, oh shit, people are going to read this, and then I decide whether or not to scale it back, and usually I decide not to, and it's a mistake. So here we are.
I mean, not for me. As a reader, and I guess / writer, like I admire the hell out of it. Like it's like every time. I mean, it makes it easy for me to go to your work because I know that I'm going to get something real. It may not be pleasant. It may not always feel great reading it, but it's going to be real. And yeah, so for my part, keep doing it. Like that's yeah.
Thank you. My mom is an amazing writer, and she's written some dirty shit herself, and she's always supported me to like go to the twisted place I need to go. But sometimes I'll be reading a story at a reading or something, and she'll be there, and I'll like, oh shit, I have to read this sex scene. I forgot this was here. And those are the moments where I start to think maybe I should have decided differently.
But Will, I think you were going to jump back in here.
All right, so Sam, this is my question then. So I'm writing something that is about a heist that I actually did when I was a teenager. And I didn't realize, and it's science fiction, but I kind of based the heist around something I actually did. When you wrote like The Art of Starving, and when you put so much of yourself into it, that can be traumatic. How do you center yourself so that you aren't getting involved with negative emotions or something that was triggering or trauma-filled when you're writing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that for me, it's always been about the whole journey of the story. So the story might involve trauma. It might involve going to that place. But if you are going to stay there, I think it's dangerous. If you're going to take the journey somewhere else, I had a real, I really wrestled with this, the ramifications of writing a story where eating disorders give you superpowers is that like people will read that, and many people who have eating disorders like will turn to that as like a thing, like a validation. And having had one, I know that mentality of like, I feel like this gives me a superpower, and also I'm like desperate for things that validate this thing that I'm doing to myself. So like, yeah, that like, how can I do this responsibly? How can I tell this story, especially for young people? And realizing that like taking Matt, the protagonist, on this journey of like, here's the damage, but here's the healing, like getting to that healing, getting to that place of like, here's how I got out of my pain, and maybe here's how you can get out of that pain. Like that's the kind of thing that makes a story like not exploitative, not damaging. I mean, people can be triggered by anything, and you as a writer can be triggered by anything. And I've definitely written shit where I'm like, nope, putting this in the drawer, can't do this. This is too much. This is too triggering or traumatic, or I can't take that journey. And that's valid. Like that, follow your gut on that. But I think that, yeah, rooting yourself in the overall journey, is crucial. Like I wrote with The Blade Between, I'm writing about the gentrification of my hometown. I'm writing about like a real situation that tons of people who I love are still caught up in. And like, yeah, like that. I'm like, I know people who are being displaced, and I know people who are, gentrifiers in Hudson. And so like, probably some of them are going to be pissed off by this book, but, by taking that journey together of like, here's what healing could look like. Here's how we can get to a different place. Here's how our pain can be transformed. At least my conscience is clear. I feel like I'm, offer not being negative, not harping on the negativity. And it was actually really healing to write both those books, The Blade Between and The Art of Starving. They did help me to come to terms with a situation that was continuing to cause me pain because I hadn't fully understood it. So yeah, I think that's there is that potential. It's not automatic. It might be a really hard journey for you or for any writer, but I think that's the possibility that keeps me going down that road, even when I'm like, oh, this road is terrifying.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So I guess that's gonna bring me to like a craft question, I guess too. So So when you're writing this out and you are dealing with those painful spots, are you like a linear writer so that you can go through the journey? Or are you like, if you get to a spot in the journey where it's like kind of rough, you're like, okay, let me go write a part that I think is a little less rough and then come back to this? Or
I think I'm pretty linear. I tend to I describe myself, there's this tale as old as time divide in the writer community between the outliners and the pantsers. And I'm kind of like a one leg on pantser. Like I'm like, I have an outline. It's not finished and I'm not going to follow it, but it exists. And so I'll often write an outline and then reach a place where I'm like, oh, these characters have figured themselves out. They would never do that thing that I originally wanted them to do. And so, if the times when I will turn away from a linear progression is usually not like, oh, this is too painful. It's usually like, oh, this isn't the right thing for this character, for this story. It might be like, oh, I need to go for a bike ride before I write this scene, or immediately afterwards. But usually it's if it's the right scene, I can get through it. That's just me personally. I support people saying you know what, let me write this scene later. If that's what they're, if that's what's going to make for the best scene.
Yeah, I was just wondering that because I was like, I know that will probably maybe running into some of these walls and be like, okay, maybe I don't want to deal with that right now. So let me come back to it. So, all right. All right, next question. This one should be more fun. All right. So what's a genre that you have not touched on yet that you really, really want to in the future?
Well, speaking of the story that showed up at my door and decided that they were going to be my next appointment, I really I double majored in college in cinema studies and Russian literature, and I have always wanted to write something about the Great Terror in the 1930s in Russia, and so I kind of want to write a historical thriller about people in Leningrad in the 1930s. But I don't know. I'm like that appointment I have deferred. I've been like, you know what? Take a seat. I'll be with you as soon as I can. We're a little backed up today. And by today, I mean in the 2020s. And so, I'll get to you as soon as I can. But also I love graphic novels and I'm working on a graphic novel pitch and I'm all over the place, with what I want to do, next.
Okay, that's cool. A historical novel that I admire anybody who does anything with historical in it because of the research alone. It's like you have to figure out what kind of shoes people wore in the 1930s. Like what? Like I would never even think of that. So
and I'm actually really bad at research because I get super into it and I'm like, oh, I want to put in all the things. And then it's not a story. It's a Wikipedia entry. It's like, great, good that you got excited about, I have this, novella that, I finished, that should be coming out next year about gay Jewish boxers in the 1920s. And I love boxing. I love, boxing history. And there's some gnarly shit in there that I turned up in my research that I'm like, stop, walk away from the book you're reading and don't put that in the book, even though it's amazing, because that's not doesn't have anything to do with any of the characters or their stories. So it's going to be a struggle if I do decide to go into the historical thriller area, because I'll be like, guys, guess what? People ate in Leningrad in the 1930s. No one cares, Sam. No. Or at least, or they care for a paragraph. They don't care for a chapter.
Yeah, no, don't do like a Robert Jordan, and give us a whole page about the spoons.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so so with research, so Blackfish City, the science in it. At least for me, the science felt kind of strong. So did you do a lot of research for that one? Or was that just more you just went for it?
Well, the interesting thing to me is I think of urban planning as a science, right? I think of people in science fiction tend to think of science as physics, chemistry, biology, astronomy, robotics, AI, the hard sciences. But I find sociology, anthropology and history, and things like that super exciting and interesting. And like, as a community organizer, I kind of was like a wannabe urban planner for many years. Like I had to understand urban planning and municipal policy really well to be effective as a community organizer. So a lot of that is just like, here are the things that make sense to me about how a city works. Here's how it might be different or better in the future if this problem wasn't there or this thing had been solved. So yeah, that was more of like, the urban planning policy wonk in me than anything else. I think that when I start to do the scientific research, either I don't understand it or I'm too excited about it. So I tend to keep it pretty bare bones.
It felt really like intricate when I was reading it. I was like, okay, this feels very much like Sam did some digging, or he already had some knowledge beforehand. It just felt really intricate in how you did it.
Thank
but
you.
with even with Blade Between, like there was parts of it where I was like, damn, how much does Sam know about Hudson? Like,
yeah, like this tiny town. What useful knowledge this is. Like, I did do a lot of research, and I did find a lot of things out that like contradicted what I had been told growing up. And then I was like, well, I like the story I heard better than the facts that I found in the research at the Hudson Library. So, I'm going to keep the legend. So yeah, there's a lot of research. Some of it, but some of what you read in the book is bullshit.
Well, and I read that in your acknowledgments, and I love that. I was like, yes, sometimes the lie is better than, or at least is more fancy than the truth. So stick with the lie sometimes.
I mean, we're fiction writers, right? So all we do, literally all we do is tell lies. So they better be good. So they better be good lies. Like tell the best lies.
Right. Good fun lies. Like, but yeah, no, I appreciated it. It's just like every time I like read some, and I know I sound like I'm just gushing, but yeah, I am. Whatever. So I feel like every book I read from you, it's like, oh, this is like a level up. Like this is like, it makes me as a writer to be like, okay, well, what am I doing to like be my like most authentic self on the page? So, I think one time I think when I came to your book signing like years ago, maybe you were talking about short stories and how like when you were looking for like agents or agents were reaching out to you, they were saying like, why aren't you writing like your short stories? Like, why aren't you putting like, so did you find like short stories was an easier place to like kind of be that authentic self at first and then it kind of translated into the novels? Or
no, I mean, I really love short stories and I've always written them and I still write them. So I think that they're like fun little laboratories for like little experiments or like doing the weird stuff that you don't care to sustain over the course of a full novel. So yeah, I try to be authentic in all the things. But a novel is like a really long journey you got to go on. So you better be really happy with what you're wearing on that journey,
yeah.
and who you're being with it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, especially with like genre hopping, I'm sure, because it's like that's a risk. Like you were saying before, it's like you don't know like how it will be received or whatnot. But for at least for my money, I mean, I guess I'll ask this: like, what is your advice for people who are wanting to move between those different genres? Because I feel like Blade Between, you nailed the thriller pacing. Like I couldn't put it down because it felt like I was like watching a TV show. So it's just like, oh, I gotta get to the next episode. Like, so, but in contrast, you had something like Art of Starving where it felt like one of those teen movies, but in like a really mature way, and it tackled like really tough subjects, but it felt like it was for teens. So I guess just what would your advice be for people who are thinking about going through those different types of genres?
Yeah, I think that the first thing is to like just read a lot. Like, you know, if you want to write a book in a genre, you should read all the things, like everything that has like, you know, gotten a lot of attention, been nominated, like read the awards ballots for the past few years, like see what the landscape is. What do you love? What excites you? What do you hate? What do you wish people would not do anymore? And be, you know, like be as knowledgeable as possible, and, you know, trust your gut, do the thing you want to do. Don't feel like, oh, every other novel in this genre that I read has this thing in it, maybe I should put that thing in it. And if that thing doesn't fit for the story you want to tell or the book you want to write, then maybe you don't actually need it. But the other thing, the key, I think, is that like have a crew, like have a team. Like someone said that like the spoiler alert to everything Sam J. Miller ever wrote is community is the superpower. And like, you know, there's always like, you know, collective action or some kind of like coming together of people that happens in my fiction, because that's how my life is. And like, I am like, if I'm amazing, it's because I have amazing people who, like, you know, have made me amazing, or to whom I can turn for feedback or guidance. So like being at Clarion and having an amazing Clarion class, at the Clarion Science Fiction Fantasy Writers Workshop, being in a writers group here in New York City and having amazing like writer colleagues who can critique my stuff. If you're fortunate enough to be at the stage where you have a agent or an editor, like that's an amazing resource. Like the editor for The Blade Between was Zach Wagman, who like edits Dennis Lehane and has done like amazing thrillers. And he really helped me nail that. Like anything you responded to in terms of the beats and the flow of the thrillerness of it is like, that's all Zach. So having a team, whether it's your crew, your friends, or the professionals you're privileged to work with at some point, like that's going to help you figure out the best way to like tell the story the way you want to tell it.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, I think Marsha, you wanted to jump in on this?
Yeah, I'm going to try to see if I can meld a couple of things that you've said today. You said that you watch a lot of TV, and then Brent asked a question early on about talking about. And you guys were talking about a renaissance of queer fiction. How does, I'm not going to ask you what your favorite TV shows are, but even though one day maybe, but I am curious to see how TV or movies influence your writing and creativity. But also, do you think that TV and movies are ahead or behind fiction in queer representation in the way that you guys were talking earlier?
Well, my favorite show is Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Good choice.
Oh yeah, I love your
my Kiyoshi tag.
I love your Kiyoshi. I love your Kiyoshi. And Legend of Korra is a close second. I think that as much as I love and watch too much television and too many movies, I think that they're way behind when it comes to queerness. Like the Legend of Korra had some did some amazing queer rep, but like. By and large, I think that movies and TV have a long way to go, sure. And I'm not seeing the kind of stories like that I'm seeing in fiction. I mean, they're out there. I'm not. It's not that they don't exist. It's just they're not in the same kind of numbers. So yeah, I mean, I think that what I learned from like TV is like the range of emotions and the storytelling power of like combining really great writing with like amazing acting, brilliant music, powerful cinematography, like great animation, like whatever it is, like that takes storytelling to a new level. And while I don't have those tools at my disposal as a fiction writer, the feelings that it fills me with are something that I can strive to replicate or emulate. And so like, yeah, I think that if you're serious as a writer, it behooves you to consume as much story as possible and to love that's like, I often say like, oh, this is work. Like watching this television show is work, because I'm feeding something, like I'm getting ideas. Sometimes literally like, oh, you can consider that shit stolen. Like I'm going to use that. And sometimes it's like more abstract of like, oh, that made me feel a thing. Like, can I make that feeling happen again in a different way?
I love The Art of Starving. I consume this novel via audiobook at the speed I usually listen to things, but like I slowed it down on purpose because I loved this book. It was something about the voice and just the world that was apparent on the page right away, right? And the main question I have with that particular book is the relationship between the just the relationships, how you, I'm trying to get you to give us some advice on how to craft relationships. Is it something that you experienced, or is this like, because at the end, one of my favorite scenes is towards the end, and the two boys are sitting there, and Matt knows they're not going to be together, and he's he's okay with that, but at the same time, if everything else that you crafted before that had to happen in order for that to work, right? So is there anything that you can give our community as far as crafting relationships, especially queer relationships? So, I mean, this is our 4th Pride episode of the month, and this is something we've been talking about all month long. So if there's something you can give us to help us out, that'd be great. I know that's not 100% a question, but
it's real. It's the thing that I get the most. I don't, it's not hate mail, but I get the most like angry emails about like, dude, what the fuck? Why couldn't they just be together? Like that, like, I think that, for a relationship to work for me, it has to feel like there's real stakes. Like when I think about like the relationships that I've loved the most in storytelling, in books and movies and television, they're the ones where like, this is like not like, I loved The Office, and I loved the Jim and Pam arc up to a point. And then once they got together, it's like, well, now it's boring, because like in order for like we love these two people, and in order for them to like fuck up their relationship, one of them would have to be a jerk, right? Like one of them would have to like do something bad. And then I would hate them, right? So like you have to have stakes. You have to have the possibility of it not continuing. You have to have like, they might love each other, but it might not be possible for them to be together for any number of reasons. Like the Golden Compass, the original Philip Pullman trilogy is like that. That's some of my favorite YA, and the relationship arc between Will and Lyra, is like, I won't spoil it, but it comes to a place that is like truly impactful and really like does a number on you, because it isn't, it's not about like, I always want a happy ending. It's that like, I want the ending to make sense. I want their relationship to be like, real and human, and humans are messy. And so, I guess I could go on, and I probably am rambling, but yeah, just like having it be like, this is like, there's real stakes here. It might not end up the way that I, as a reader, want it to end up, but it should end up in a place that feels right and makes total sense to me as a reader. And if you do that, also like when I was at Clarion, Holly Black was one of my instructors, and she's an amazing young adult writer. And she talked about Die Hard, and how the stakes in Die Hard are not, will he die? Like if he dies, that's the end of the story. There's no, like, that's it. It's not like, oh my God, I hope he doesn't die. I mean, you hope he doesn't die. But then that doesn't, like, if he dies, that's not gonna like feel like, that's gonna feel like the end of the story. The stakes in Die Hard are, is his relationship with his wife going to work out? Is his like relationship, is this journey going to impact his relationship? And so for me, that's like, even if you're not going to kill a character, they should have something they love and something they want, and something that they might not end up with. And that's how you sort of like make a character feel alive, is wanting something, and also how you make a reader, be invested in their journey.
For sure. So looking at the time, it's my job. So does anybody have any last questions before we get to our normal last question? Especially since we're wrapping up our Pride episodes. Go ahead, Brent.
All right. So since we're talking about Pride, we're talking about queerness and all that stuff. What queer authors are whichever one works. Queer authors that people should be looking out for.
I always have a billion of them that I forget when people ask me this question. So I always try to have just like a couple, so that instead of giving you like a long stammery list of recommendations, I think it's sort of like de rigueur at this point, but Gideon the Ninth, by Tamsin Muir, like blew me away. And like, it's like, I was reading about it. Everybody was saying how great it was. I'm like, okay, lesbian necromancers in space. That does sound amazing, but also like, I don't know. And I was like, yes, this is amazing. This is brilliant. And I love every minute of it. But the book that hasn't come out yet that I think is like the most exciting queer story I've read in a long time is Lee Mandelo's Summer Sons, which is sort of like a Southern Gothic queer noir that is like scary and amazing and does this great job of like from like page one, you like invested in this character's like the situation they're in, what they want, where they're going, like they want it really badly and you want it for them. And so yeah, Lee Mandelo's Summer Sons is the one I keep like shoving at strangers randomly on the street to say, read this.
And we'll probably put this in the show notes, right, Marshall? So people can go find it.
Yeah, I will do that. Yes, for sure. So, Will, do you want to ask the last question? I'm going to throw it to you. With
Sure.
your lag and everything.
Yeah, with my lag, sorry. So our last question is what we usually ask everyone, and it's just, what keeps you writing?
I'm trying to figure life out. I'm trying to figure out this fucked up world we live in, and all the things that make me like angry and scared and confused and excited on a daily basis. And I think that those are things that I'm trying to figure out, and I want to figure those out. And one way that I do that is by implanting them into stories. And if that's something that people respond to, then that makes me super happy and gives me an excuse to like put my therapy onto paper and expect people to pay attention to it. So yeah, being confused and angry and excited about life.
That's awesome.
Well, I can't thank you enough for being on the show. I can't wait to dive into the rest of your books. I haven't read them all like some people, but I cannot wait to read the rest of them. So anybody have anything else before we go?
Again, Sam, thank you for doing this. I was so excited to do it because, I mean, we talk on the internet, but we haven't had a chance to see each other virtual, face to face, whatever. It's been a long time. So this was fun.
Yeah, likewise. I had a great time. Thank you all for having me. This is super fun. I appreciate y'all. Happy Pride.
And this has been Just Keep Writing, a podcast for writers, by writers, to keep you writing. You can find us at justkeepwriting.org. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Feel free to reach out to any of us on our social medias, and please jump in our Just Keep Writing Discord channel. Links to all of that is in the show notes. Lastly, please support our show by going to patreon.com/justkeepwriting. We offer daily writing prompts, early access to podcast episodes, and much more. Thanks for listening, and just keep writing.